Hi guys! A few months ago I made a video all about my experience using magic mushrooms. I talked about that particular trip and a little bit about the visuals and all of that and how it affected my life. If you want to watch that, I'll link it up there. But in that video, I got so many requests to film my experience on LSD/acid. As I always try to do with videos like this, I'll put timestamps in the description, so if there's a particular thing you want to see about acid and not this entire video, you can just go ahead and click down there. As with all videos about drugs, I probably should start by just saying, if you're under 18, don't do drugs. Also, drugs are illegal, so this video is probably not going to be monetized. If it is, then woohoo! But chances are they're not going to want to monetize this, which is completely understandable. Although, they monetize my magic mushrooms video, which is kind of weird. Before I talk about acid and all of that stuff, I just need to say a couple things. So, if you're under 18, don't do acid, don't do any drugs. Your brain is still forming, apparently. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if I'm right about this, but I'm just going to tell you what I ought to say. So, if you're under 18, don't do drugs. It's just best to not. It's best to wait till you're fully formed because you can mess with your brain quite badly. And I'll talk about that more a bit later / in another video. But drugs like this, particularly psychedelics, can fuck with your brain, so you do need to be careful. So if you're under 18, if you've got lots and lots of history of mental illness in your family, then I would recommend not doing acid. I mean, I say that. I've got a history of mental illness in my family. I've got family members with depression and anxiety, and since I've done psychedelics, my anxiety is worse. However, this is something I'm going to talk about separately in another video. But if you want a video about how psychedelics have fucked my brain, go ahead and let me know and I'll do that for you. But if you've got a history of mental illness in yourself or in your family, I wouldn't recommend doing psychedelics, but I still did. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. That's also another disclaimer. I'm one person, I've had one experience, particularly with acid. I've only actually done it twice and I didn't do that much. So make sure you watch other videos of people who have done more. I definitely think if you're thinking of doing a drug or you want to know how it affects someone's life, it's really wise to listen to lots of different people's experiences and you're going to get the widest range of information because it is different for everyone. And finally, just like I said in my magic mushrooms video, it's not nothing. It's not like getting drunk. It's not like doing a pill. It's a little bit different than that. Psychedelics in particular kind of change a lot of stuff and they affect you after the day that you're on them. So it's not just a case of, oh, I had a really nice time doing loads of drugs and now I feel fine. A fair amount of the time, more so with magic mushrooms, but also with acid, it does affect how you think afterwards. So just bear that in mind. If you're prone to feeling a little bit nuts, you might not want to do acid. However, I'm prone to feeling a little bit nuts and I loved doing psychedelics. I know that's not very helpful advice, but I'm just trying to be transparent and honest. When I was thinking about doing drugs, watching videos like this really helped me, so that's why I'm making it. Also, I put on makeup for you guys. I hope you're grateful. Now that's all out of the way, I'm going to tell you about the day that I did acid. I've done it twice, but I only did it properly once, and I'm going to tell you all about that. About me, by the way, hi, I'm Rachel, I'm 22. I've done a fair amount of drugs, sort of, in my life. I haven't done anything scary, but I've smoked lots of weed, done lots of MDMA, I've done a fair amount of various psychedelics, so I do kind of know what I'm talking about, but nowhere near as much as some people do. So take what I say with a pinch of salt, and definitely watch other people's experiences. If when you're watching this, you're a more experienced tripper and you've got anything to add, by all means, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I know people love to read the comments in videos like this. So I'm not going to tell you how I got the acid. We got it from someone that I know. I took one tab of acid, so just one tab. And at the time I weighed 20 stone, which is 280 pounds. So just to let you know, I was a lot bigger then than I am now. So I think the amount of acid that was in my system was less compared to how it would be now that I weigh 200 pounds. So bear that in mind, that the dosage probably was fairly low-ish, but I still had a crazy time on it. With acid, one of the most important things is the setup and the place you do it, who you do it with, and things like that. I did it with one other person who was someone that I was very close with. We had a really good relationship and I knew them really well. That person had done acid lots of times before. Although he wasn't trip-sitting me because he was on acid too, I felt better about doing it with him because I knew that he knew what he was doing. You'll hear this a lot, but it's really true. When you're on acid, it's so important to be in a place where you feel comfortable. If you're outside in the street or if you're at a party or something, you've got less control over the setting that you're in. Whereas if you're at home in your room or at your house, you've got way more control over where you are, what music's on, how you feel, where you go. You can go for a walk or whatever, or you can say to people, I'm just gonna go and have 5 minutes on my own or whatever, and you're still safe. Whereas if you're out and about, it's not really the same. I did one tab in my house with my boyfriend at the time. You put the tab on your tongue, you leave it for like 10-15 minutes and then you swallow it. We took it in the morning, so we dropped the acid at about 11:30 in the morning, and it wasn't until 1 o'clock that I started to actually feel that I was getting high. The first thing that I noticed was things started sounding weird. It was about 1-ish, and we were listening to some music. I don't remember what music it was. I think it might have been something really obvious like the Beatles, and I remember thinking, gosh, this music sounds really clear. Not all that different from magic mushrooms. I'm just going to say now, the main difference in my experience between magic mushrooms and acid is magic mushrooms, it was very internal. It made me look inside to myself, work out what was going on in me, all the tripping and craziness. I could have closed my eyes and had as equally as good a trip as if I had them open. Well, maybe not equally, but sort of, but you get what I mean. It's more intrinsic and internal. On acid, it's like, oh my God, the world is amazing and everything outside is more kind of amazing. And you're more in tune to the outside world, whereas magic mushrooms, you're more in tune to the inside world.
Hi, post-bath editing Rachel here. Just to add in quickly, what I just said about magic mushrooms being more internal and acid being more external, that is a very, very vague, non-specific kind of explanation. There's a lot more to it than that. When I was editing, I was listening to myself talk and I was like, I need to mention this.
The first thing I noticed was the music sounded really clear. I'm going to tell you the name of the person I did it with because I'm going to keep mentioning him. So his name's Chris. We went downstairs and he started playing on the piano and I was just kind of walking around the house. It was summer. I opened the back door. I sort of walked up and down the path in the garden. I walked through the house a few times downstairs and I was listening to him playing the piano. And I just started to become aware that everything was looking really vivid and feeling really clear. My experience on acid was much bumpier than my experience on magic mushrooms. So when I was coming up on acid, my brain started to loop a little bit. So sometimes on acid you can get this thing where you think a thought and then you can't stop thinking the same thought. So it sounds really scary, and when I talk about it, it makes me feel like, oh, but don't freak out, it's nothing awful, and it doesn't happen to everyone, but it just happened to me. I can't remember the exact wording of the thought, but I became aware that for the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes, I'd just been thinking constantly around the same loop about the bongos, and Chris was playing the bongos, like round and round and round in my head. And I wasn't fully up yet, but it was very strange, and it made me it almost made me start to panic a little bit. So within the first hour of feeling like I was starting to come up, probably between 12:30 and 1:30, I was really aware that the thoughts I was thinking were really malleable, almost like a ball of string. If I was to pull one out or start thinking along a certain line, I would find myself dragged down that line and I would be thinking quite deeply into something that I didn't normally ever think about. And my thoughts were becoming borderline obsessive about the particular thing that I was thinking about. I hope that makes sense. If anything I say doesn't make sense, you can just leave me a comment. I'll try and clarify or make a follow-up video.
Editing Rachel again. I just want to add, this whole loopy thought thing, when I'm watching this back, when I'm editing it, I've made it sound almost really scary in the video, and I just want to reiterate, it wasn't exactly a scary experience. It didn't freak me out. It wasn't like a bad trip. It was just like an odd, interesting thing to be happening inside my brain. I didn't want you to watch this and think it was really horrible and really scary, because that wasn't the case. Hope that makes sense.
Chris was playing the piano and the bongos or whatever, and I was sort of walking around the house, and we sat down on the sofa and we started talking a little bit about music and how it was made. And I started feeling really quite weird. My emotions started getting a bit panicky, and I remember saying to him, I'm thinking so many thoughts, it's kind of freaking me out. I just keep thinking and thinking and thinking. And he, obviously he's done acid lots of times, he said, okay, let's go for a walk. So before I tell you about the walk, I just want to touch on how who you're with affects how it goes. The dynamic between Chris and I, we weren't officially in a relationship at the time, but I was really in love with him and we were really happy with where we were. However, I was really insecure in myself at the time. So that first part of the trip, I would ask Chris a question and he would answer, and I would worry that he was lying. So my brain would start to kind of, and this is not because he was lying or because of him, it was just because I was on acid. My brain was trying to dig for a deeper meaning that wasn't there in what he was saying. And that's what I mean by who you're with affecting your trip. If there's a slight dynamic or awkwardness or anything going on between the two of you, you might feel it amplified when you're on acid. So when I told that to Chris, I explained how my thoughts were getting kind of weird. He said, let's go for a walk. So we went for a walk. It was a really sunny day. I think it was June or something. We opened the front door and I remember I stepped out of the front door into my front garden and I remember thinking, oh shit. It was like suddenly the acid hit me, and stepping out of my front door from the darkness of my house into the daylight made me really start to trip and feel that I was tripping. So we walked down the street and I remember we walked past some grass and I wasn't up yet, I was still on the way up. If I'm honest with you, I think the fact that I was on acid was making me think that I had to do weird stuff. I was quite a different person then than I am now. I lay down on the grass and I looked up at the sky and I remember there was a rainbow in the sky, and it was the weird kind that doesn't go across the horizon, it was in the sky, and I took a photo of it and it's on my Instagram actually. If you scroll back you'll see it. But I remember looking at the rainbow and for a second I was like, fuck, am I imagining that? So I said to Chris, can you see that rainbow? And he was like, yeah, I can see it. Then I sort of relaxed a little bit. So we walked along and that was when I experienced a fair amount of visuals. So everything I was looking at looked so much clearer, so much more beautiful. If I stared at it for a little bit longer, it would start to wobble or move or kind of look fluid. Because I was quite big at the time and I only did a tab, I didn't get loads of colours and loads of splitting and loads of really malleable visuals. I'm sure if I did more acid or if I did it now, I would get more of that. Although I'm probably not going to do it again. If you want to know about that, let me know. But I remember thinking that everything looked so much more beautiful, so much clearer. All the colours were so much more beautiful, so much more attractive. For me, being 5'6", 20 stone or 280 pounds, one tab of acid was not enough to make everything look crazy and trippy and super acidy. I never quite got there, not in the same way that I have done on magic mushrooms. It was a school day and we were standing outside a massive school, and I remember looking up at the school and my size perception was kind of messed up, and I remember the school looked like it was huge. It looked like it was absolutely massive. I remember looking up at it and thinking that it looked like it was going to fall on me because it was so big. Those are the main kind of visuals that I can explain. I feel bad that I don't have more to say about visuals. It was very much that the entire time. As Chris and I were walking away from the school, he asked me a question. He asked me something like, what do you want to do in your life, or where do you want to go in life? And I found myself answering really honestly. It was like the answer was just coming up out of me. Like I couldn't stop it, the truth just came out. And that's kind of the second thing I want to say. I found that it was very difficult to lie to myself when I was on acid. It was like the layers of bullshit that I had placed in my brain were somewhat moved. It wasn't the same for me as magic mushrooms, in that it fucked my ego, but that might be that I didn't take enough. It's an amazing time to have a really good chat with someone when you're both on acid. You can talk about things and the truth is just right there on the tip of your tongue, and you can have a really nice conversation. It started to get dark. Me and Chris were walking around the park and we found this massive tree, and I'm pretty sure that Chris was quite a lot higher than I was. He was like half my weight and only a little bit taller than me. We found this massive tree and we were just talking to the tree, and it sounds really crazy. I was hugging the tree. So we were touching this tree, and I remember all of a sudden the tree felt like an animal. I was leaning on it and touching it and stroking it, and it suddenly felt like it was alive and it felt like it was breathing. It was a huge tree and it was really big, and I was touching it and I felt like I was touching an elephant or I was touching some sort of big animal. I really felt like I was connected to it. I know that sounds like woo-woo hippie bullshit, but I really felt like I was kind of connected to this tree. It sounds so stupid, but that's how I felt. I remember a few times thinking, God, this is so weird, and then saying to Chris, this is really weird, and he was like, you're just on acid, like, it's fine. I felt like I knew what the trees had been through. That sounds like such bullshit, but that's how it felt. When Chris and I left the park, we were walking back down some roads, and I was really quite high at the time. I was really tripping. All my visuals were really shaky. Everything was really kind of moving and really vivid, and all my thoughts were really loose, and it was like someone opened my mind, put a whisk in and whisked up my thoughts. We walked past this big dustbin. Chris barged into the bin by accident and said sorry. I thought that the bin replied. I don't know why I thought this, and when I say it back it just sounds so stupid, but I thought the bin had kind of said something back to Chris. So I was like, whoa, hang on a minute, come back to Chris. And he came back, and I tried to tell him that I thought the bin was trying to talk to him. When I say this, I know it sounds stupid and ridiculous. And of course I knew the bin wasn't trying to talk to Chris, it's a bin. But I was so high, and my thoughts on acid were so malleable and controllable and floaty that I couldn't get rid of this thought. That's another thing that I think you might want to be aware of. Sometimes when you're on acid, you lose control of your thoughts, and if you try and control them, you can freak yourself out. So instead of trying to control my thoughts and say, no, the bin didn't talk to Chris, just let it go, and make myself let it go, what I had to do was just say, if it did or if it didn't, I'm on drugs, so that's why I'm thinking this. And that's a really key thing that I learned. When I just didn't know what was going on and I felt really weird, I would say to myself, I've taken acid, so it's okay. The reason I feel like this is because I've taken acid. And it would soothe my mind, and I would remember it's okay. Eventually I'll come out of this. Eventually I'll sober up, and I'll remember this, and I'll know what I really think about it. I can't make any rash decisions or movements or do anything too big while I'm in this state. I kind of saw it as almost like a mental holiday. Like, I'm here, I'm on acid, I'm feeling my feelings, and I'll be fine. Whatever I feel's fine, whatever I think is fine. I'm with Chris. If I do anything stupid, he'll make sure I'm okay. So just enjoy the ride, and then when I come back down, I can evaluate what happened and decide what I think about it. But I'm quite analytical, and I wanted to decide what was going on in the moment. So I had to kind of let myself loose and let my thoughts flow. Otherwise, I could tell that I might have gone down a bad route. So going down a bad route is something I want to talk about. So when Chris and I were walking home, Chris started to feel weird. He stopped talking. I became really aware that he felt weird. He couldn't explain what was wrong, and he wasn't really trying. He just told me, it's okay, I just feel a bit weird, I'll be fine. But when the person that you're with on acid starts feeling weird, it can kind of mess with how you feel. So I began to worry about why he wasn't okay, and that's when my thoughts started to get a little bit nasty. I started to find myself trying desperately to grab onto a thought. So I was trying to think, why is Chris feeling weird? What's going on with that? I want to know what it was. I was trying to kind of work it out, and that was when my brain started to freak out. So the trip never turned bad, and I've never had a bad trip exactly, but I could feel on the fringes of my brain the potential for a bad trip. I hope that makes sense. I wasn't having a bad trip, but I could tell that if I were to think too much about this thing, I would go down a negative road in my brain, and I might end up somewhere really scary. Luckily that didn't happen, but I could tell then that there was potential that it might happen. When Chris and I got home, one of the people I lived with got home, and I hadn't done the washing up. I remember in the landing upstairs, the person was really close to my face. They were really close to me. My pupils were massive at the time. And the person said to me, the kitchen's a bit of a mess. Are you gonna wash up? I remember saying, of course, I'll wash up. I'll go and do it now. When I went into the kitchen, I couldn't wash up. I was physically trying to wash a plate, and I had a sponge and stuff, and I was trying my hardest to wash this plate, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't make myself do it. It just wasn't working. It sounds stupid, but the way my brain was and my hands were all soft, I just couldn't wash up. Chris ended up taking over, I think, and we cleaned up the kitchen and then kind of scuttled up into our bedroom. But that was another moment where I nearly freaked out. The person was right in front of me, and they were looking me in the eye, and I was trying not to make eye contact, and I was terrified that they were going to work out that I was high and then say, what the fuck, why are you high? And then I would start to really lose my shit. Luckily, I just about managed to kind of hold it together, but it got quite touchy for a while because I was really struggling to maintain my calm around this person who was very sober. And then slowly we got into bed and we put on some David Attenborough. We were watching this show about birds, and I was watching this bird defending its nest. And I remember David Attenborough's voice was so unbelievably soothing in my ears, and I was just watching the animals move and listening to David Attenborough's voice and thinking, wow, that day was fucking wild. It wasn't until about 2 a.m. that I finally came down enough to the point where I was able to fall asleep. Just before I fell asleep, I put in some earphones, and I remember just sitting there, kind of like slowly rocking, just listening to this music and telling myself that eventually I would be sober and eventually I would be okay. I never completely freaked out. So the whole day, I never properly freaked out, but I was much closer to freaking out than I would have liked to have been. And that's why I say that acid for me was much bumpier than magic mushrooms. I've done them a few times. I have a time to talk about that I haven't told you guys about yet, and I'll do a video about that at some point. But the previous time when I was in my bedroom, it was very smooth. It was up, 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 and then it was up as fuck, and one continuous sensation and one continuous narrative almost all happening inside my head, and then I came down. On acid, it was much more like that, so it was a very different feeling. Now I've told you about my day and my experience on acid, I'm just going to add a few afterthoughts. In terms of the fun I had and how much I enjoyed it, I would have to say that the day I did acid was one of the best days of my life. I loved it. I always recommend to people, if you're in a good setting and you feel good, do it. 100% do a tab of acid. You know, a tab is not going to fuck you up. I would really recommend giving it a go. I loved it, and I absolutely love my day on acid, and you might be able to tell this, I quite like psychedelics and I do really enjoy being high and doing drugs. And in terms of after effects, I would say from the acid, I didn't really have any. So the following day and the following days after doing acid, I felt fine. And my brain chemistry didn't feel fucked. My head didn't feel like it had been messed with. I genuinely felt okay. I felt good, actually. It wasn't until I started dabbling in magic mushrooms that my anxiety and my brain started to be affected. I am going to make a video about that. I know I keep saying that. It's relevant, but I'll make another video all about that and how magic mushrooms have changed my life. For me, acid was a lovely day, a great experience, and I would recommend 100% for you to try it, but don't do more than a tab the first time. Maybe even do half a tab, although I've done half a tab and I didn't feel too much, but I was very heavy, so bear in mind your body weight and things like that. It was a lovely experience, it was a good day, and it was really interesting and really enlightening, but it didn't change me. I hope that makes sense. If you've got any questions about any of the stuff I said, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be looking at them and trying to reply to people. I find the comments on videos like this really interesting. I love a conversation about drugs. So if you want to tell me about your experience, if you want to comment on my experience or answer any of the questions that I kind of asked, go ahead. If you want to see any more stuff from me, I have a load of things on my channel, not just about drugs. So feel free to check that out. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'm really grateful to you for watching my stuff. Also, I did my own gel nails. Look how good they are. I'm actually like so proud of myself. That one has a little star on it. I think that's everything. Editing Rachel might jump in here and there to add bits in that I've forgotten. If that happens, I hope it's not too annoying. I love you guys so much. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!